Hello and welcome. Today is my birthday, and as I've done in the past, I've had what I called a traditional birthday walk around, and that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm at the factory of this vehicle here, Affinity, Travel Different. You can see the camper van in a different film, but there it is, stuck in the sort of a very small showroom they've got here. My van is right next to the main entrance, and it's manufactured at this former factory. And the reason I say former is because to a large extent it has been destroyed, but this is the sort of place that really fascinates me. This factory we've got here was once a textile factory. This is Ozorków, which is the north of WWII in central Poland, and this town owes its origins to textile production, and so it was founded around 1809. It had got town rights by about 1817, 1818, I've even seen 1820, seen various dates given, but around this time. And what happened was, in this area of what was Poland, then Congress Poland, it was a sort of a Russian satellite state, I suppose is the best way to put it, before it was completely taken over by the Tsarist regime. And in the 19th century, the beginnings of the 19th century, special privileges were given to people set up businesses, very similar to the way which happens today. And these privileges included things such as you could get free land, or you might be able to repatriation of profits. It was an incredibly advanced form of FDI, foreign direct investment. And factories such as the one which is here. Now, as you can see today, it's all warehouses. On the left, this is clearly socialist era, and on the right it is somewhat newer. But on this ground here, the factory was built from 1895 to 1897. It replaced a former one which had burnt down. Here were employed thousands of people. And so Ozorków, which saw huge growth in the 19th century, not as much as WWII did though, because WWII, which was a tiny village at the beginning of the 19th century, within 50 years was the second largest industrial area of Russia, because it was obviously part of Russia then, and only second to St. Petersburg, so bigger than Moscow, bigger than Donbass. And it was the largest textile producing area in Russia at all. So it was the largest country in the world, and it was the largest textile producing. So I mean, the textiles aren't produced here now. If they are, it's in very small numbers. Anyway, so the point of this was to actually show the my location. And what's curious about this for me though, we've got this chimney. Now there was a chimney, you can see an old print. I'm going to do a video on this place, so I find this sort of thing really interesting. But there was a chimney actually not so far from there in the print I've got from the end of the 19th century, although that one there is socialist era. It's made from concrete, and but the factory that was here was somewhat similar to as we see this today. So its main growth was the end of the 19th century. There was a economic downturn just before the First World War, which I think might have actually had something to do with the First World War. And in the interwar period, there was a problem because the markets had been cut off from markets. So Poland was a much smaller country, and this in itself produced problems. Now, one of the things that happened though, because of the growth of these businesses, obviously for one end you had the huge influx of what became urban working classes, but the people who actually started the businesses out, and in some cases themselves they were poor people. There were rags to riches stories, but they built palaces such as the one we've got here, which actually predates the factory. Now not much is left of the factory, but this palace complex here, I think palace is probably, I'm using the Polish word, and that probably is the right word, palace, and this was from the middle of the 19th century. And not only that, but looking around, we've got others. I mean, obviously this is a new building, but the one beside it, this is 19th century clearly, and to turn down the road down there's a very interesting square. So people, the super rich, as you can see at the time, would actually live right next to the factories. You see that everywhere, of course, not just here. Now this belonged to the Schlossler family. They came from Aachen at the beginning of the 19th century. And there were businesses here, I've got to point out as well, that went bankrupt. There were those that failed to get into cotton weaving, cotton production, that stayed with wool. In the interwar period, we see many businesses operating from homes. More than 50% of the textile production was home business, people working very long hours, often very old people, and they were supplying the big factories, the big companies. Now there were in the 1930s was a period of industrial problems. There were major strikes here in 1933, 1935, 1937. There was even government intervention from Warsaw when thousands of people went out on strike. And there's other things which have happened, for example, similar to what we see, for example, in the United States, when there was racism here, which was directed against the Jews, Jewish population. The strikes which happened by the largely Catholic workforce. So 1/3 of the population here was Jewish. A much smaller minority was of German descent. This is the interwar period now. There's possibly been 1 or 2 Russians as well, but the overwhelming bulk was Polish speaking Catholic population. Right. Now, as it's my birthday, I'm going to, and I get on well with the people here, so I'll go out. This is a Polish tradition. You bring in sweets. So if you're at school, you bring in sweets, and you're supposed to bring in a cake or something, you bring your own cake in here. And so instead of bringing myself a cake, unless I find one, I'll get some ice cream. I thought I'll up the odds a bit, and I've got some pretty good wine as well, so I'll bring that along at the same time. The town of Ozorków owes its existence at the beginning of the 19th century, so just over 200 years ago, to this river, or stream really. It's the Bzura, B-Z-U-R-A, Bzura, and it's above all noted for the Battle of the Bzura, which took place in September 1939 and remains the largest battle with Polish involvement, or the Polish army fought. As such, I suppose there were larger ones as part of larger campaigns, but the largest battle of Polish army is the Battle of Bzura. The second largest one, here's an interesting fact, was the Battle of Bautzen at the end of April 1945. And that was a German victory, end of April 1945. Anyway, I've been meaning to do a film of this one because it's a very hardly known battle. I was in Bautzen last month and I thought, I'll do some filming. I ended up filming some motorhomes instead. You might think it looks sort of dreary and boring. Let's face it, look, it's November. I mean, I went out yesterday and did some filming. It was quite a nice sunny day, but as my birthday only happens on this day in November, I'm rather stuck. Anyway, it says there, go the other side of the street, so let's do that now. There's a number of rather attractive 19th century wooden buildings here, and there's a couple of them, and the amount of protected buildings, listed buildings as we say in the United Kingdom,
it's quite high for such a small place. There's about 20,000 people who live here today. There's about 15,000 just before the Second World War. Obviously the Jewish population was almost entirely murdered, and a number of the Polish were as well, so that considerably reduced the population, as you'd get actually just about everywhere in Poland. So this is the main square, Market Square. Obviously it's going to 19th century town, dates the 19th century. So when building this town, they thought of putting in a nice big square. So for a town of 20,000 people, it is quite large. Having said that, I do know towns which are much smaller, which have got even larger squares. But, let's face it, this is a pretty good size for a market square. I'll tell you something about the church if I knew anything, but I don't. I think that tree's there for 100 years of independence. Let's walk over to it and find out. I'm gonna have difficulty reading this because I've taken my glasses off because they get steamed up. What's that say? Ah, right. Independence is a good and not only value is good, but not only valued, but also costly. Should have translated that better. They were the words of Marshal Józef Piłsudski, who is seen as the person who brought about independence in 1918. And so this was on the 100th anniversary of becoming independent. Although I've got to say, that tree doesn't look as though it's 2 years old. In fact, today it's 9th of November, and independence was on the 11th of November, so the tree is even less than 2 years old in theory. Right, the little man is green, which means we can go across the road. Now it was about 7:20 when I left, and so it's 10:08 now. And the reason I'm doing it this early in the morning, this walk, is because I've got a day full of meetings. And there's a trade fair. Now obviously because of coronavirus, all the trade fairs in person have been cancelled. But I shall be at the fair virtually. So I've got meetings set up all day, which, I'm quite honest, is even easier than actually going there, if you don't get the food. This is the road in from the south, so you come from Łódź, you'll possibly use this road to get in. And I mentioned some of the listed buildings, and here's one. I mean, it's quite magnificent, in my opinion. I mean, just looking at, I suspect that'll be about 150 years old. I suspect. And at the bottom of this street, we've got the Lutheran church, the Protestant church, although it seems to be closed off to me. It's at the back down there, which you can possibly see. And I mentioned about the Second World War. Obviously I'm a historian of Holocaust, it's my specialist subject. There was a ghetto here, which was to the left-hand side of the town. Look, and for the left-hand side, sorry, of where we are now, it's up a hill. Very little information has been published on it, but I've done a bit of research using original documents, and I'll publish that as soon as I can. The first factories, in fact, were to what is now the right of the town, and they were done there because they were lakes there, or there are lakes there, which they needed the water for textile production. And that was a factory I mentioned earlier that burnt down, so the factory was moved to the other side, the northern side, where I am right now. And here we've got the tram line. This was the second longest tram line in the world. I think the number was 46, stand to be corrected. Unfortunately it's gone, but I remember driving down here in 1997, I think it was, and seeing the tram out in the countryside. I thought that was quite incredible. The longest tram line in the world I've also filmed, as would happen, and that is along the coast in Belgium, and that line I think is 38 kilometers long, if I remember rightly. Anyway, so this tram line, it may be sort of shorter and still be in a rather good position, but of that I don't know. Now, I do like to make films when there's a lot of sunshine. Today, well, there isn't any, but one good thing about autumn is you get these fantastic colours, which I think always makes it look much better. Anyway, so that is Ozorków. Rather quickly, there's other things which I've actually filmed, and other things that either be on my motorhome travel time site, or my travel site once I get it going, or my history site. A lot of stuff is published on my history site. It's called History on YouTube, and if you're interested, then do subscribe to that as well. I can see some things as well. Unfortunately, the days former glory are over, although as can be seen, that was used in post-socialist times. It's obviously it's difficult for retail, obviously now we've got coronavirus, which makes it really difficult, and there's going to be an economic downturn. But as retail has gone away from small high street shopping to retail centres, which is, I mean, in the United States this has happened for many years. In Europe it's considerably newer, and politicians often talk about bringing back the high street. But it's, you know, it's not possible to bring back the high street. As long as people have cars, then they're going to want to go to the shopping centres and do the shopping there. And I know there are exceptions, and you're going to write that down below now that you disagree. But that's a trend, and you can't disagree on the trend. So you can see these big buildings, once residences of the wealthy, and over there we've got a very big building, still the residence of the very wealthy. What I find quite curious here, we've got this former socialist era cinema. I don't know if it's still in use, but I suspect it could be. And Ludowe, that's how, the People's Cinema, something like that as a translation. And I'm certain when they thought of that's a socialist era word, the People's Republic of Poland. Problem was the title didn't tell you which people it was the Republic of. So I'm back in the main square now. Here's a kebab place, which I noticed was open yesterday morning. Very difficult at these times for people owning any form of gastronomy. So you can see it was a quick walk, because you've got the time stamp. So now, at my time, I've got my first meeting at 9:30, and so I'm going. That'll give me time to do my shopping, walk back, which won't take very long. It's only a kilometre or so, and have my impromptu birthday party.